Welcome. Good morning. Thanks for coming out in the rain. This is Geography 10, World Regions, Peoples, and States. This is Lecture 1. If you're not here for this class, please feel free to get up and leave. Okay. Today is going to be mostly a housekeeping day. There will only be a handful of lecture-like, substantive-type things. How are you? Yeah. Wet? Good. Welcome to the second semester. These are our goals for the class this semester. This class functions as an introduction to geography. Who wants to offer a guess as to what geography is? Anybody? What's geography? Am I going to have to call on somebody? How many of you feel like you have some idea? Whew, man, we're doing badly here. Okay, what do you think it is?
It's like the study of how people interact with their environment over time.
The study of how people interact with their environment over time. That's quite good. Well done. Anybody else? You all satisfied with that? Okay. Do you feel like you know? Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
It could be like the study of the world, but like opposed to geology, which would be like the physical world, it would be like everything above that.
Okay, the study of the world, but unlike geology, which is the physical world, this would be everything above that?
Yeah, like culture.
Culture which sits on top of the rocks, right? Okay, anybody else? How many of you read National Geographic growing up? Quite a few of you. Is that what? Do you think that's geography? Does that give you? I mean, it's called National Geographic, right? Is that geography? Yeah. Okay. So if that's geography, then what is it? Could we get a little further into this? What does that suggest that geography is? Really high quality photographs, right? Oh, you've decided this is enough?
No. Wrong number.
Wrong number. All right. Okay. Anyone else? If geography is like National Geographic, then would that satisfy you for the purposes of this semester? Would you feel satisfied at the end of the semester if what you had gotten was a more detailed or sort of significant understanding of National Geographic? Yeah? Pretty much? No? Not really. Why not? Geography has two parts, physical and cultural.
One is the study of landforms.
Okay, landforms, like geomorphology.
And the other is the study of people, places, and states.
Okay. Okay, so we've got a kind of physical side of geography, which is about things like landforms, the sort of shape and makeup of the surface of the Earth. We have another part of geography, cultural, sometimes more generally called human geography, which is about people and the way they relate to that surface of the Earth. And National Geographic is just a really pretty way of going at that. Really captivating, catches the eye. Okay. That's all. I mean, there are a lot of different ways to define it. In our department, we tend to focus in on the things we've just talked about. The surface of the Earth, and by that we mean, well, basically everything relevant to humans, from subsurface, tectonics, geology, geomorphology, up to the sort of top of the atmosphere. So we're not going to talk about astrophysics. Other than that, we've pretty much got everything's fair game. It could be pretty much anything else having to do with humans and their relationship to the surface of the Earth. So that will include oceans as well as land, that kind of thing. This is a class in which we try to introduce that ridiculously broad subject and give you the tools to think about that interrelationship between humans and the Earth. Okay? So this is going to include an understanding of both physical and human diversity, all of the differences, the diverse landforms, cultures, peoples, that kind of thing. We're going to look at social, physical, and ecological processes over space and time. So now all we're doing is getting a little bit more specific about the kinds of things that make up this subject. And we're going to consider how these have produced patterns at various scales. For example, regions. The sort of generic name for this class is World Regional Geography. And there are a dozen or more textbooks out there with that title or something very close to that title. Regions is a concept that is very central to geography, has been central to geography for a long time. It's sort of an unavoidable part of thinking about this relationship between people and the surface of the Earth. Patterns, regions are a kind of pattern, right? We can sort of look at the surface of the Earth and the makeup of the people who live on it, and we can see various kinds of patterns. And those patterns, once we sort of organize them spatially, take on the appearance of regions of various kinds. But of course, this depends. What kinds of regions we see depends on the scale at which we are thinking and looking at things. And I'm going to talk a little bit today about why that's so important. Here's some examples. Oh, should I kill the lights up front here? Enhance the PowerPoint effect. How do you like your lights? Is that good? You want more light, less light? Good. Okay. So what are these? We have three different maps here. The one on the bottom comes out of an atlas and depicts what? Climates. Climates of the world. Apparently, oceans don't have any climates. Climates only affect land. Actually, that's not true. The map leaves out the climates of the oceans. I don't really have a good place to sit. I'm going to have to look at this. How many types of climates are there? 6. Tropical, dry, arid, and semi-arid, mesothermal, microthermal, polar, and highland. Pretty much covers it, right? You've seen one of these maps before? All right, that's one way of organizing the world into regions. 6 of them on the basis of climate. What about this one up here? Anybody have any idea what that is? What are those regions? That map has a very specific purpose. Anyone want to guess what it is? How many regions are there? Is it 5? There are 5 around land. Greenland apparently doesn't count. Or no, maybe Greenland is part of Atlantic Arctic. Maybe the oceans are their own. So maybe there are in fact 8. Pacific, Indian, Atlantic, Arctic, and then those terrestrial ones. Why do you suppose the lines are drawn where they are? Why are the lines out in the ocean and not right up against the coasts of these continents? Any guesses? Tectonics. Good guess, but no. I mean, if it was tectonics, right, this line right here would have to go splitting right down past us, right? Because there's actually, that fault is not in the ocean. It's right here in California. Any other guesses? Yeah. Continental shelf. That's a good guess because continental shelf does extend out into the ocean beyond the coastline of each continent, right? But no, that's not it either. Anybody here a bird watcher? Anybody like to watch birds? Look at birds? No? Nobody? That's a habit you get into when you get older and make more money. This is a map for birders, believe it or not. This is a map that organizes the world into the spaces, the units, the regions, within which, if you're a really diehard bird watcher, you organize your sightings. I kid you not. So if you see a bird here, it goes on your Africa list. If you see the same bird here, it goes on a separate list and counts as a separate sighting. This is really important if you're a diehard bird watcher because they're really into every sighting they can get. Granted, that's a little odd, but why do they do this? Because the birds of the world typically are found within these regions, and that includes the coastal marine sort of margins of each terrestrial area. And it's really true. If a bird that's supposed to be or is usually seen only here and has rarely been seen here turns up here, people from the wealthy parts of the world fly down there very rapidly in hopes of seeing that bird within the line drawn around this continent because that's a separate sighting. You're supposed to find this at least a little bit amusing. No? Yes? All right. So there you have the world organized into regions according to bird life, according to the patterns of the movements of birds. And believe me, we won't talk that much about bird watching this semester, but it's a useful example for certain things. What about this one? Any ideas what those are? Anybody recognize any of those little logos? They may be outdated by this point. At the time that I found this map on the web, these referred to the sort of consortiums, the corporate entities that organized the assignment of web addresses, URLs. So each continent had its own, at that point anyway, sort of organizing institution for keeping track of web addresses. Here again, the world organized into regions according to a different process or phenomenon. What do all three of these maps have in common? Any thoughts? Yeah. They separate the world into regions, exactly. They are world maps. They encompass the entire surface of the Earth. They divide the surface of the Earth into more or less contiguous or comprehensive units. And for that matter, they tend to be organized more or less in terms of the continents, right? That's not quite so true in the case of this map. You know, this, you might call this one region, this tropical region, kind of cuts across. Most of the world regional geography textbooks are organized in this fashion as well. They are organized by continent. And somewhat in the mode of National Geographic, you get a chunk of the semester devoted to each continent, and you go to those places, and you learn various fascinating things about them. And that includes geology, natural resources, political systems, linguistic and cultural phenomena, religions, that kind of thing. And it's something, like National Geographic, it's something of a grab bag. It's almost as though you start with the continents, because that's a kind of neat organizing framework for encompassing the surface of the world. And then from there, it's just a question of, well, what's interesting? And works really well for a magazine. Helps keep things interesting, gives you something to think about when you're sitting around reading a magazine. But it's not necessarily a very rigorous way of thinking about this broad question, right? It's more of a curiosities and anecdotes, stories. Yeah, they usually have some kind of practical significance, but it can be somewhat ad hoc. And that's a big part of why we don't use any of those textbooks in this class. They're fascinating, but they're not that fascinating. They tend to be long. They tend to be somewhat tedious, in my opinion. They also tend to be exorbitantly expensive. And I'm not terribly taken with them, so we're not going to use one. feel free, of course, to go to the library and look at one anytime you want. You might find a lot of interesting information there. And hopefully we'll cover a lot of the material that we would cover if we used one of those textbooks, but we're not going to. All right, now we're going to scale down somewhat. What's this? Any thoughts? The green box indicates Western Turkic Iranian something. Red is Eastern Mongol and Tungus something. Blue, Southern Tibetan Himalayan something. Any ideas what that something might be? What's it sound like? Guesses? Anyone? Yeah. People. Indeed, this is about people. Any thoughts about what aspect of people? Their culture. Actually, that's close. In this case, it's actually a linguistic map. It refers to families of languages that are spoken in these boxes. Any idea what's going on right here? Does that mean that the people there speak all of the languages? Come on, that's an easy. It's almost a trick question. It's not a trick question. It's actually just a stupidly easy question. What's the answer? No, of course not. It doesn't mean that all the people in the little box here speak all of these different languages. It means that there are some people of each of those groupings in that box. How precise do you think that is? Do you think there are like nice border fences that map just exactly along these lines? They put it right out into the ocean and stuff. Try to keep all of the Eastern Mongol Tungus in here and not let them out over here where they wouldn't belong? No, this is not the kind of line that gets fortified and defended. In fact, these lines are probably, grossly misleading if you actually tried to go down onto the ground and look around and see whether they applied or not, right? These are just gross depictions. How do you suppose this map was made? We'll get into that. Part of what we're going to look at is how maps are made. Who are the people who make them? In this case, made by scholars of linguistics, right? Where's this? Any ideas? This little inset map. Yeah. That's Afghanistan, which, interestingly enough, is not labeled on this map. And what's this? What are the units here? Yeah. These are ethnic groups. Probably correspond pretty closely to linguistic categories, right? And we see that if you zoom in on Afghanistan, which according to this map has a green line running roughly east-west through roughly the middle of the country, and inside of it we have Western Turkic Iranian speakers, and then to the south we have, who knows, maybe they don't speak anything. No, that's not true. But once we take a closer look, we discover that it's actually not even remotely that simple. There's no east-west line. In fact, there's a bunch of different groups. And again, we have what? A simplification. It's not like everybody here is Pashtun and there are no Pashtuns up here because it's all Tajiks. It's mixed up. On the ground, it's really mixed up. But this is a simplification intended to give you some kind of sense of the organization or the spatial distribution of people of different ethnicities within the country we call Afghanistan. Would this be a useful map to you if you were in the U.S. military and you had to go to Afghanistan and try to communicate with the people there? Yes? How useful? Might be something you got like in your first week of training before you went, right? Give you just a general overview. Then you'd get this map. You actually arrive in Kabul. Hopefully they have better maps than this. This one is actually better suited for a tourist. But nonetheless, when you actually get to Kabul and land on the ground, you're suddenly faced with the fact that, ew, boy, you know, this little simplification here is not that useful all of a sudden, because you're actually dealing with block by block, street by street, still more variation. And the sort of rules of thumb or the nice, simple depictions you got in that earlier map actually would not be adequate to you, right? Now, the point of all of this is, again, to suggest that the patterns you see or the patterns that you need to see or want to understand are going to depend on what you're doing, what the purpose of your activity and map are, and the scale at which what you're doing matters. If the scale of what you're doing is going door to door trying to communicate with the people who live in Kabul, you need a very different map than this one up here. It's a fairly simple point. I realize it may even seem banal, but it actually, when you start thinking through all the ramifications of this, it has some serious implications. And this is, to give you a sense of what I mean when we talk about processes producing patterns at different scales. And here we're only talking about spatial scale, right? Neighborhoods versus regions within a country versus continental regions. We're not even talking yet about temporal scale, the length of time over which something happens or a process unfolds to create a pattern, right? The temporal scale at which these patterns were produced is actually quite different from the temporal scale at which the patterns depicted by these nation-state boundaries were produced, right? Okay. One more example. Here is our own country, the United States, divided up in 3 different ways for 3 different purposes. Any thoughts what these purposes might be? This one I really like. This is how you divide up the country if you are fascinated with natural disasters. Believe it or not. For some reason, these are the units that are relevant or have been found to be relevant for thinking about things like hurricanes and tornadoes and so on and so forth. Notice that we get our own unit all to ourselves. We have our own special mix of natural disasters, although it apparently does not include the Mojave Desert. That part is somehow not us when it comes to natural disasters. Why blue, green, orange? Who knows? But what about these two? This one I like. It's got we pulled them apart. I'm still trying to figure out why this is the Southwest when it's actually north of the Northeast, at least in part, and it's east of West. I can't remember which of these is which. One of these is the regional corporate breakdown of one of the nationwide real estate companies. This is how they organize their offices, so to speak. They have regions. The other one, I think, is like a telephone company or something like that, or maybe cell phones. In any case, again, this one makes a little bit more sense in terms of, but I mean, New England is, why not call it North Atlantic? Don't you think there should be some kind of consistency in the categories and the way the underlying framework they use to make sense of this? Maybe. Maybe it doesn't matter. All right. I want to ask you guys to do something. I'm going to pass out some maps. These are blank maps of the United States. I've got about 60 of them. So I need you to group into groups of like 4. Here, let me just maybe you can just pass them up the head of your aisle here. And then down, sideways as necessary. Hopefully we'll pass these out in roughly the right order. See how far those get. Can we pass these along back up? So what we're going to do here is a little exercise. Make sure that some of them get to the back, please. I apologize if it turns out we don't have enough, but if we don't have enough, just get into bigger groups, please. This is a fairly simple exercise. What I'm going to ask each of you to do, I'm going to give you 5 or 10 minutes in your groups, and I want you just to talk among yourselves and decide on some way that you'd like to fill in this map. And I honestly don't care what you use. I'm just interested in your stab. Take a stab at dividing the country into regions. You can use whatever organizing principle you want. In past years, I've found that guys like to do this in terms of sports, you know, that kind of thing. But whatever you like. So talk amongst yourselves about where those boundaries between those units ought to be. And then fill in, provide the boundaries and the labels. And then I'm going to collect them. And between now and Thursday, I'm going to look at all your maps. And I'm going to pick a handful of them. Maybe 3 or 4, maybe as many as 10. And I'm going to reproduce them on overhead slides. And on Thursday, we're going to look at them and talk about them. And again, this is not for a grade. This is not going to, you don't have to put your names on these. This is entirely anonymous. I will just tell you that on Thursday, I have two criteria that I'm going to apply in deciding, maybe 3, which ones to use. And that is, I'm going to use the ones that are interesting and amusing. And then the third sort of criteria, kind of small footnote criteria, is I'm not going to use the ones that are offensive. And what we're going to find is that all of us have in our heads already, whether or not we think about it, a regional sense of the United States. Actually, we've got lots of different regional senses of the United States. And what we're also going to discover is that those regional senses of the United States probably tell us more about you than they do about the United States. So keep that in mind. All right, 5, 10 minutes, something like that. Go. How's it going? Are you finished? No, okay, a couple more minutes. Okay, see if you can't try to wrap up here pretty soon. Try to finish up. We're going to, a couple of GSIs are going to come around and pick them all up. So, I look forward to reading these. This is actually one of the high points of the semester for me, is reading through these. But rather than talk about them now, let's wait until we can put some of them up on the board and we can all look at them and think about them. That will make up part of class on Thursday. Just a small note here. One of the things that I like to do in a class of this length is have a break in the middle. Normally, it would fall at about this time, okay? And it would be 5 minutes long. It's intended to give you a chance to wake up your neighbor. use the restroom if you need to. Get up and stretch, whatever. I mean, if you badly have to check your email or something like that, you can do that. So we aren't doing it today. We've sort of just had a kind of quasi-break there. Just an effort to give everybody a chance to stay awake and alert. But that is part of how I will run this class. And it will fall, again, sometime around 10:15 each morning. Okay. So, a couple more points about space and geography. I want to give you something to take home and think about. How many of you think that there are more than one kind of space? Yeah? I got like one person raising his hand. 2, 3, 4, quite a few. Okay, maybe 10 or 12. Care to elaborate on the different kinds of space? Or why it is that you think you in your understanding, there are more than one? Okay, so there can be different kinds of space in the sense that different places are sort of devoted to different things. You have living space. You can have waste space, wilderness space. I'm actually thinking, I'm looking for something a little more conceptual than that. Yeah?
Well, I think space is either how it's described, with politically lined up maps, like a political map of California is different
Okay.
than Nevada.
Okay.
How people see it. If you go to Tahoe, you see it as the mountains, and it's how you perceive the space.
Okay, so there's sort of space as it's depicted on maps of political units versus space as it's actually experienced when you're on the ground. Okay, that's good.
Well, if space is like the room in which things can happen, you can have like physical space or time seen as space or probably other.
Okay. Physical space, time seen as space. Care to elaborate on that?
If you're saying where something happens, you could say it's a geographic location, but you could also say like when it happens, which is
Okay. So if you're thinking about an event, something that happened, you can talk about the location where it happened. You can also talk about the point in time when it happened. Well, that would be sort of differentiating space from time. I mean, physicists, of course, have got a variety of ways of thinking about space. Geographers also have a variety of ways of thinking about space. I want to talk briefly about them. I'm going to sort of provide you or organize them into 3 kinds of space right now. And this is borrowed from David Harvey, who is perhaps the world's most famous living geographer. He's British. He's taught much of his career in the United States, currently teaches at City University of New York. He talks about absolute space first. And this is the idea that every place has got a location that you can describe in a single coordinate grid. Most especially, this is about the fact that no two things can occupy exactly the same space, right? Two things that are different, one of the ways in which they're different is that they are necessarily in different places. Space, in this sense, is absolute in the sense that it is a single framework in which everything has its space, occupies its space, and nothing else occupies that space at the same time. If you think about Descartes and Cartesian space, or you think about latitude and longitude, these are frameworks within which space is a single underlying sort of substratum within which you can describe anything you want as to its location using the same language. A point is at has an x coordinate, a y coordinate, that kind of thing, in two-dimensional space. This is the way we think about space when we want to organize property in land, for example, right? We lay out a grid across the entire landscape, and we define coordinates, and then we can say this piece of property starts at this point and goes here, and then there, and then there, and then there, and it's a parcel of land, and it belongs to some entity. And it doesn't overlap with the parcel next to it. It's got a nice line right between the two of them. If you had to decide exactly whose land this particular whatever is sitting on, you could do it. And you could do it, in theory, you could do it for anything, anywhere in that space. It's absolute in the sense that it is singular and unified, and in the sense that it partitions everything into absolute entities, non-overlapping and contiguous. Now, this is probably the kind of baseline framework within which most of us, most of the time, think about most of the spaces that we need to know about on an ongoing basis, right? We know that this class meets in this room at this time, and we come to this space, and it doesn't overlap with the classroom next door. And within this space, we have this class at this time. And if you're a student in this class, you sit in this space, and I'm up here, and I talk to you, get into that kind of thing. Okay? Now, of course, on your way to getting here, how many of you used a GPS unit to get here this morning? None of you? No, of course not. Because, in fact, to get through your day, absolute space, even if it is somehow the way you think about space, right? You didn't think, coming to class today, that we would share a classroom with another class, did you? No, you figured this classroom was going to have its sort of absolute limits within space. And that was a necessary precondition to having this class. Otherwise, there would be another person with another microphone making another set of words right now, and it would get all muddled and confusing. However, on the way here, you probably relied on a different kind of space, relative space. Right? This is the idea that a place is next to, across from, above, below, near, far from, around, inside or outside, some other place or places. This can become totally second nature, right? If you've been here for a while on campus, you know your way around. You don't even really hardly need to think about it. If someone tells you for LeConte, you know where that is. Maybe you have to consult the map briefly, but then you're like, okay, no problem. I don't need a map. I'll just walk. And you get here by knowing that you're going to go past such and such a building. You're going to get off the BART station that happens to be near here. And you're thinking about the relative location of this classroom vis-a-vis everything else out there in the sort of neighborhood or on the route between your bedroom this morning and here now. And it's actually the relative location of this spot that matters to you relative to everything else. And this is a different way of thinking about space. And then there's this third type of space, which David Harvey calls relational space. And here, we're thinking about the ways in which places take on meaning or significance as places of some human importance or importance to some humans. This has to do with the fact that we are signifying people. Humans are signifying beings, right? We can invest meaning and significance in things, and frequently, one of the ways we anchor that significance and meaning is spatial. Different places have various symbolic meanings, and they become a part of what that place is. You can think about Berkeley. The campus of Berkeley has got a variety of symbolic meanings. You run into this whenever you go someplace else in the country and you say you go to Berkeley or you teach at Berkeley. People have all kinds of ideas about what that means. For me, I go to conferences and give talks and so forth, and everybody assumes that I must be some kind of radical hippie because I teach at Berkeley. And if I'm not a radical hippie, they go, wow, what's wrong? You're not a radical hippie. That's a relational attribute of Berkeley that floats around in the minds of people, right? There are symbolic places, Gettysburg. There's Ground Zero, right? Probably within your own life, there are places that have got more than just a sort of spatial, locational significance to you, right? Whether it's your childhood bedroom or your neighborhood or someplace you went on vacation, those places are invested, at least for you and probably for some of the people you know, with importance of various kinds. And you start thinking about the ways in which certain places have got huge importance for large numbers of people. Maybe a religious shrine of some kind, or a historical site where something important happened. And you think about the way that can organize people's emotions and their actions and motivate them in certain ways, and the relational significance of space becomes really clear. Now, it's important to remember that these are not somehow completely different, exclusive ways of, well, there might be exclusive ways of thinking about space, but they're never exclusive on the ground, right? You can think about any given place in all three of these ways. And in fact, all three of these ways of thinking about space are important for almost any place. It will have an absolute space or spatiality to it that you can describe in a coordinate system. It will have a relative space. You can say, oh, well, it's actually 3 blocks up from some other location or something like that. And in most cases, if you're talking about something at all, it's probably got some meaning, some significance that is relational. And what we're going to try to remember and grapple with over the course of the semester is all of these different kinds of space, again, at different scales and across time. Any questions about that? All right, from here on out, lecture today is largely housekeeping. These are the names and email addresses of our 4 fine GSIs. Please rise. Zoe Friedman Cohen is just a new student, grad student in geography. She works on natural resources and identity politics in the Middle East. Shannon Cram, next to her, is another geography graduate student. She works on nuclear waste in Washington State. You're allowed to wave if you want. David Piper works on demography, population geography, migration at a global scale. And finally, back in the corner under the screen, Jessica Lage works in Spain on development, tourism, migration, the global economic collapse, and climate change. Her newly born baby is in the stroller down here, peacefully sleeping and failing to take notes. I have put the email addresses for each of them up here. And I hope you all can see down here on the board, I have written the section numbers and the times for the sections that each GSI is responsible for. And my hope is that you have an idea of which section you are enrolled in or wish to be enrolled in, and that you can therefore look at what I've written on the board and figure out which GSI is relevant to you. And then if you need to communicate with your GSI between now and next week, you can use the email addresses up here to contact them. Can everybody read this scrawl down here? Should I go over it very quickly? If you are in section 101, 102, or 105, you are with Shannon. 103, 104, and 110, you're with Jessica. 106, 107, and 111 is David. 108, 109, and 112 is Zoe. Any questions? All right, you guys can sit down again. Thank you. The readings. Books. These are the books that are or should be at the bookstore. I've gotten at least one email already from somebody with a sort of update on how things are going at the bookstore with respect to the books for this class. What's the word? What's the latest? Anybody having trouble finding these books? Everything's cool? David Delaney, Territory, Mike Davis, Planet of Slums, Alfred Crosby, Ecological Imperialism, and the Wiley National Geographic College Atlas of the World. That all clear? Okay. There are additional readings which are marked with an asterisk in the syllabus. By the way, last night I posted these slides to the BSpace site for this class, and I had it send an email to all of you. Did everyone get that? My practice, to the extent that I can hold to this, is to post the slides for lecture by the night before the lecture. Because as I understand it, many of you prefer to take your notes on printed out versions of the slides. That will be my practice to the extent that I can actually make sure to get it done ahead of time like that. I don't promise always to do it, but I should be able to do it almost all the time. There is at the BSpace site the syllabus, which I did not print out and hand out today because I figured it would be probably half that paper would have been wasted for a variety of reasons. So you can get the syllabus. I'm going to go over it very quickly right now in case you haven't seen it and you want to know what we're doing. Everyone knows about BSpace. Everyone knows how to get to it. This is the site. The syllabus is there. This site will get a lot of use over the course of the semester for this class. If you don't know how to get there yet, you should find out. You should figure it out. We will use it to post some readings, maps, lists for map quizzes, other materials, that kind of thing. Quick question. Is there anybody who would prefer that I have a reader generated at one of the copy shops for the additional readings that aren't in the books? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Don't be shy. It's totally fine if you would like us to do that.
As opposed to putting it on BSpace?
Well, this would be in addition. It's going on BSpace no matter what. Okay? I'm just curious. There are some people who prefer, for whatever reason, to actually be able to just go to a copy shop and pick up the reader and not have to deal with printing things out themselves. And if that's the case, that's fine. But I haven't done it yet. Is that something I should do? Okay, I'll do it. Podcast. This class is being podcast. That's why I can't start until 9:40, because they don't start the recording until 9:40. If you go to that website, you will be able to, of course, after the lectures have happened, you will be able to download the audio of each lecture, provided that there aren't any technical glitches. And sometimes there are. But for the most part, you can do it that way. Now, does this mean that you don't need to come to lecture? Straw poll. Yes or no? Yes? No. I would encourage you, if you are sick, if you have a cold, if you have the flu, listen to the lecture on the podcast, please. Don't come out here and add to the vectors. I mean, I've already got kids. I've got plenty of vectors for getting sick already. I imagine most of you already have plenty of vectors. We don't need to, multiply them. In my view, that's the single best reason to use the podcast. Of course, you're also welcome to download and listen to them as a review. I like to think that you will get more out of this class if you're actually here and we can have some interaction, that kind of thing. New this semester under a pilot program, the same site that provides the podcasts is supposed to be able to provide the slides. I have no idea how they do this. I have no idea if it will work. I have no idea how much trouble it is. And of course, it can't happen until after the lecture, so you can't have them in your hands to take notes on. But when they said, will you agree to let your class be part of this pilot, I said, sure. And I'd be interested to hear from you about how well it works or doesn't work. just so I can tell them if they ask me. But just so you know, that should also be possible, provided there aren't technical problems. Any questions? All right. This is in the syllabus. You don't need to read it right now necessarily. I suppose maybe I should read it out loud. This is just to say you're not allowed to cheat, and if you cheat, we will enforce the rules. And remember, this is mostly an issue when it comes to questions of like plagiarism. And in case you don't know, we can use Google ourselves, and any like 12-word long string that we think might not be yours, we will easily find the source of when we type it into Google. So just again, this is just academic integrity. This stuff is important. Okay? Questions about that? Good. I'm going to run through the syllabus quickly to give you a sense of what we're going to do. We're going to start with a prologue of sorts, territory and global slums. And we're going to think about what territory is, what it means for something to be territory, what it means for some entity or process or people to turn some space into a territory. And the reading from Delaney, chapter 1, will begin to answer those kinds of questions. It will provide a framework within which to think about a great deal of what we cover in the rest of the semester. We're going to look at the atlas. We're going to look at the opening pages of the atlas and talk about maps and how maps are made, what cartography is, what maps can and can't do, what they involve, things like simplification, generalization. As a note, I should emphasize, the atlas, you will encounter the atlas, use the atlas primarily in this class for purposes of map quizzes and actually learning the names of the places of all over the world, right? And it's going to include cities and states and rivers and mountains and deserts and oceans and seas and bays and the whole 9 yards, right? However, we're also going to use the other parts of the atlas, which you may begin to forget about over the course of the semester. And that includes page numbers that will be assigned reading that go over various sort of themes or topics for which maps can be usefully deployed. So I want you to remember to do the reading, and I want you to understand that you're responsible for those parts of the atlas as well. And in addition, you'll notice that there are tables of information, significantly, lots of information in the back of the atlas, all kinds of statistics about the economics and populations and so forth of the different countries of the world, the biggest cities and so on and so forth. And that's information that I'd also like you to remember is there and can be used. We will draw on it from time to time. And you will not typically be expected to memorize any of it, but it's there and it's a lot of information and you shouldn't forget that it's there. And then we're going to start talking as a preliminary cut into the state of the world today. We're going to talk about slums, and we're going to start reading Mike Davis's book, Planet of Slums. We're only going to read the first 3 chapters, and then we're going to put that book down and come back to it and finish it at the end of the semester. And the purpose of the first 3 chapters is to throw out there an interesting question. Mike Davis's question is, why is it that all over the world in the last 50 or 60 years there has been an enormous growth in slums? And we'll talk about what slums are, but for now, it's happened everywhere. It's happened in rich countries, it's happened in poor countries, it's happened in capitalist countries, it's happened in communist socialist countries. It's happened in the North and the South. It's happened everywhere in the last 50 or 60 years. And Mike Davis wants to understand why. And we're going to put that out there because on the one hand, slums are obviously very local, right? They're located in very specific places, one by one in each city around the world. They are parts of cities. They're part of almost every large city in the world. Why should every large city have a slum, a part of itself that is populated by very poor people living in substandard conditions, to gloss it very simply right now? If it's a local thing, city by city by city, how is it that it would have happened everywhere in the world at the same time? How do you explain that kind of thing? What kinds of processes could be said to drive this phenomenon? We're going to put that out there as a sort of first cut. And then the reason we're going to put it down is so that we can then back up and try to come at this question from a broader perspective, not just right here now there are slums, but let's think about the growth of cities. Let's think about processes that have created the conditions in which this slum urbanization has happened. And that's going to require that we go back a long way. So in the next part of the class, we are going to talk about human migrations, domestication, and agriculture. What's domestication? Anybody? Yeah.
Livestock.
Okay. We're talking about the domestication of plants and animals. The taking of wild animals and turning them into livestock. How did that happen? When did it happen? Where did it happen? What difference did it make? Same thing with plants. What's the difference between a wild perennial grass and wheat, for example? We're going to look at how, when these things happened, how they affected human societies, helped create what we call civilization. We're going to do this for the first half of February, roughly. We're going to read significant amounts from Alfred Crosby's book and some more from the Atlas. We're going to see a couple of movies. The one on the 9th is about slums. The one on the 16th is about grass. Why is that funny? What's funny about grass? Now, you'll find that I'm actually a big fan of grass, and I mean that in a scholarly, rigorous sense. Come on. We're going to watch a movie about grass. It's about the migration of a pastoral tribe from its winter to its summer grazing lands over a mountain range along the Iran-Iraq border. And it was filmed in 1925. Contact and conquest. So first part, back here, here we're talking about roughly the last 10 to 12,000 years of human history, ever since plants and animals were domesticated. Here, we're going to talk about roughly the last 500 years. So we're going to go from a much bigger temporal scale to a smaller one, or maybe an intermediate-sized one, 500 years. We're going to talk about what happened when humans and plants and animals and germs made their way from Eurasia to what's called the New World, even though it's as old as the rest of it, which is to say the Americas, and what happened, how that shook things up. Why is it that people from Eurasia migrated to the New World and, by and large, conquered the New World, the peoples there? And how did that affect civilizations, economies, populations, ecosystems, that kind of thing? We'll have a review session on March 4th and a midterm on March 9th. Then we will scale this temporally down a little further and think about the last, say, 250 years since the rise of the Industrial Revolution. We'll read Weber and Marx and Orwell and Bernstein and another chapter from Delaney and some more from the Atlas. We'll try to understand what capitalism is, what colonialism is, how they built on the developments of the previous periods, and how they changed those things, and how that reorganized space, connected the economies of the old world and the new world, that kind of thing. We'll watch another movie. This one is about coffee production in Ethiopia. We will ask you to be working on the bibliographies for your papers, and they will be due in sections the week of March 29th, right after spring break. And then we're going to scale things down to the last 50 years, give or take, or the second half of the 20th century up to the present. And we're going to look at liberation, which is to say the end of colonialism in places like Africa. We're going to think about globalization and neoliberalism, phenomena that have unfolded by most people's accountings in the last, say, 40 years. We're going to finish the Davis book. We're going to read some other readings, and we're going to finish Delaney. By that point, it will be late April. You'll turn in your papers on the 13th of April. We will watch another movie on the 15th, Life and Debt. This one is about Jamaica and agriculture and the World Trade Organization and restructuring, structural adjustment, international finance and lending. On the 27th, we'll watch a movie about China and events in China in the last 21 years since Tiananmen Square. On the 29th of April, we'll watch a movie about the maquiladoras in Mexico along the border with the United States. And on the 12th of May, we'll have a final exam. Part of the reason that class is organized this way is because, well, they've shortened it now. It's not 15 weeks of instruction anymore. It's 14 weeks and then the reading thing, right, at the end. But my own feeling is that by the time you're like 12 weeks into a 15-week semester, everyone is exhausted. And the idea here is that by the time we get to about week 12, week 13, we're going to be pretty much finished with reading, pretty much finished with assignments as far as, papers and that kind of thing, and we're going to watch movies. And we're going to use those movies to think about what we've learned, but that way we won't get quite so exhausted in our effort to comprehend the entirety of the Earth in one semester, right? This is a lot of work to make sense of the Earth in one semester, and you need to be able to sort of kick back a little bit towards the end to maintain your sanity. Okay, here is an effort to capture the layout of assignments and quizzes over the course of the semester. This is in the syllabus as well. Map quizzes. We are going to give you a week beforehand blank maps of different parts of the world. And they're going to, somewhat like the map you filled out here earlier, except that these will have little dots on them. We're also going to give you, a week in advance, lists of names of cities and countries and rivers and mountain ranges and bodies of water and landforms, deserts, that kind of thing. And you'll have a week to figure out which name goes where on the map. The dots obviously are there to signify where cities are located. And then at the beginning of section in these weeks, as indicated, you're going to come in and you're going to be handed a blank map, and your GSI is going to write 15 names on the board, taken randomly from the list that you were provided. And you're going to have 10 minutes, give or take, to write those names on that map and turn it in. And that's a map quiz. And we're going to do it for most, if not quite all, of the world. And this just becomes part of the course. These are set up in such a way that they don't happen in weeks that you also have to, say, turn in your paper or turn in your bibliography, that kind of thing. So they shouldn't pile up too much. They won't happen in the week of the midterm, that kind of thing. It may sound kind of, rote or banal to have to do this, but in our past experience, in fact, this has been something that most students actually really enjoy. It gives you a good sense of, it makes it a whole lot easier to read things like The Economist and the New York Times and so forth and actually know where some of these places are. It's a good sort of first step, baseline information for geography. Are there any questions about that? Okay, I can't remember if I put any slides in here about the... Oh, yes. Oh, boy. We got to move along here. We got 6 minutes. I'm going to give you a little bit more information about how the class is graded. The map quizzes collectively are 15% of your final grade. Participation in discussion sections is another 15%. The midterm is 20%. The research paper is 20%. The final exam is 30%. Is that clear? I expect you to do all of those parts of the grade. In other words, if you're taking the class pass-fail and you know that you've accumulated 70% of your grade or something because you've done so well, it doesn't mean you can just skip the final exam. Okay? This requirement really only applies to people who are taking the class pass-fail and think that that means that they can sort of skip out on part of it. You have to have some kind of grade for all 5 parts if you're going to pass. You're responsible for all of the material in the assigned readings, whether or not they are covered in lecture. Okay, so do the reading. Do the reading before the lecture for which it's assigned, so that we can actually talk about it in lecture. The research papers, we will talk more about this down the road. The purpose of the research paper is to learn research skills and techniques across the breadth of the UC library system. The purpose is to learn how to do scholarly research as opposed to Google research. Okay? And there is a difference, and we will help you understand that difference and get the skills you need to do this. It might sound really intimidating. Most students find that once you're actually shown how to do it, it's actually not that hard. And it's really pretty fun and interesting. You will have a great deal of leeway to decide for yourself what you want to write your paper about. And that's something you might want to be thinking about as you do the readings and so forth. Does something strike you as interesting? Would you like to do some more looking into it? Because it will be your responsibility to come up with something you want to write a paper about. And we will ask you to start pinning that down before the midterm so that you aren't trying to scramble and do it all at the end. To learn practices of citation and attribution, develop a critical appreciation of how regions have been produced and their effects in the world. Readings will be specified further in lectures. There are no sections this week. Sections begin Monday of next week. Okay? Rules. Turn off your cell phones when you come in. If it rings, I or the GSI or the person to your left will answer it for you and talk to whoever it is that's calling you. Please don't surf the web, do email, text, that kind of thing. No plagiarism and cheating. Please don't wander in late. Help me learn your names. It's impossible for me to learn everybody's names, but please don't be shy about telling me your name. And with any luck, I'll remember, although I'm not terribly good at it. Take all issues to your GSI first. If you have a question or a problem or an issue, there are too many of you for it to get all sort of ad hoc. There needs to be a basic protocol and system. And the system is you go to your GSI first and you explain your situation and your issue and you try to work it out with your GSI. If you do not satisfactorily resolve the issue with your GSI, then feel free to bring it to me. Okay? Enrollment. There are 200 people registered. That's the limit. As of Friday, there were 41 people on the wait list. This room holds 196 according to the website. If you decide not to take this class, please drop it quickly in order that people on the wait list can get in. If you want to take the course, the key thing to do, if you're not enrolled yet, is to attend a section. I realize you may not be enrolled in a section yet, or you may be enrolled in a section that conflicts with some other class you're taking and you can't get to it, in which case you should find a section you can get to and go to it and go to the GSI and say, I'm actually enrolled in this one, but I need to be in this one. Make sure your GSI gets your name and understands that you wish to be in that section. Every single time I've taught this class in the past, it's sorted itself out, and I haven't had to exercise any crazy authority about who gets to be in and who doesn't. The wait list has always eventually gone away, but it may take several weeks. If you do not attend section, even though you're enrolled, and we get to the point where it's drop-ed deadline and there are still people on the wait list, I will sit down with the GSIs and figure out who's enrolled but hasn't been coming to section, and we will drop you in order to make room for people who are coming to sections and want to be in the class. I don't want to have to do it. I've never had to do it before. But if that happens, that's what we'll do. So you have to attend section in order to secure your place in the class. okay, even if you are already enrolled. Any questions? I think that's it. The readings for Thursday. Pages 5 to 15 in the Atlas and Chapter 1 of David Delaney's Territory. You can see the readings up here for next week as well if you wish. Thanks very much.